I think that's my green flag. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So welcome everyone to this evening's meeting. I think if we start from the top of the agenda with any apologies, have we got any apologies?
We have not received any apologies for absence, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Minutes of the previous meeting, which you will all have been sent in advance, I'm sure. If we can just go through page by page, please. Anything on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. I'm not hearing anything. Are we happy to accept them as a true record of the previous meeting? Someone mind seconding that, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Item 3, any deputations or public addresses? Not aware of any. Okay. Any declarations of interest, please? And item 5, any matters of urgency, which by reason of special circumstances, they should be considered? No. Okay, thank you. So if we go on to the first, if you like, major item of the agenda, I think BDO have got an internal audit update. So welcome, and if you can present your paper, and I'm sure members will be interested to hear what you've got to say and respond accordingly. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Chair. So we've got 2 papers. One's our annual plan, so what we're looking to try and do between now and the end of March, and then a progress update which follows that. So agenda item 6 is the annual plan. For some of you, you'll be familiar with this. So what this sets out is the approach that we've taken to identify which reviews that we would focus on between now and the end of March. You'll see on page 4, which is page 10 of the packs, but the small page 4 of the actual report. It comes up slightly small on here, unfortunately, but effectively what it does is it takes the risk register that the council has in place and tries to map the reviews that we're suggesting that we're doing against your risk register. The reason we do this is because hopefully it highlights that the areas that we're looking at are those which are identified as key areas of focus for the council. So we're trying to focus on areas which are identified as risk areas. And that's what that map there is showing, but happy to take questions on that afterwards. And then following that, from what is page 11 of the agenda packs, or the small number 5 on the report, is the various different reviews which we're suggesting go into this year's plan. I think the backdrop and the caveat to all of this is that we held discussions with heads of service, with members of the governance team and others to try and create the plan. Obviously this went through Joe and Stuart as well, respectively, but that was largely back in February, so before obviously the major impacts of COVID, and that may have changed the risk landscape and profile for the authority. I think the difficulty there is, not just with Northampton, but with every authority that we're working with, is that the risk landscape is likely to continue to change between now and March. And so it will be quite challenging. And I imagine the plan compared to prior years will amend and adjust more so. And there might be the need to have more flexibility where reviews come out of the plan and other ones may come in where there's an urgent piece or a new piece of work that might need to be done where we've got to refocus our tasks. So I think that's one element, is that, yes, this is a plan we're presenting to ask for your approval, but I do think that it's likely to change over the course of the year as new pressures, or obviously it's not just based on new risks, actually teams may not be able to fulfill the audits if they have higher levels of sickness, BDO have levels of sickness or other challenges, and all of this will be done on a remote basis. Clearly, we won't be coming into offices to do any of the work, and that might prohibit or cause difficulties in some areas, but we'll know more about that as we go through the year. So it's slightly different to what we would normally present in terms of a backdrop, but it's just setting that caveat there. And obviously the other pressure is you're moving towards unitary, so there is probably more of a benefit for us to bring work forward so that it's completed. kind of potentially by January time, but bringing work forward when we're starting a bit later because of COVID is all going to be a slightly challenging environment. So it may mean that there are surplus days available at the end of the year that are not used. That may well be a position that we're in where some of these reviews may not happen for a variety of reasons. So that sets out the plan and a bit of a backdrop. We also, after that, set out some other reviews that we haven't included in the plan, but may be of consideration for the committee if you feel there is some switching that might need to be done. And then after that, in Appendix 1, which is page 16 of the pack, small page 10 of the report, it sets out our charter, which is a standard document each year, but we also have to ask committee to approve our charter as well. So I'll pause and kind of open for questions on this. But like I said, it's with that principle of, I do expect the plan to change. I do expect there to be difficulties as we go along, not just with Northampton, but other authorities as well. We are going to try and progress with as many of these reviews, but we can't quite predict the level of which we may kind of get through the whole plan, or what challenges may lie ahead. But we'll continue with the plan depending on the approval of the committee and views around the room.
Okay, thanks for that, Preet. That was helpful. And I think all members will understand some of the constraints you're working with, and will, of course, understand the need for the plan to be flexed for the remainder of the year, as you've mentioned, and also subsequent years. I've got a couple of questions, but perhaps before mine, can I just open it up to see if there's any other questions that people want to ask Preet from what I've seen so far. I'm seeing Councillor Stone there putting a hand up. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. I'm delighted to see those items that are going to be scrutinised by you. I think they're absolutely the right ones. I have got some queries though. I don't really understand why Brexit isn't a risk. You know, when you consider our supply chains, the reach of our contracts, Veolia is based in France. I fail to understand why Brexit isn't a risk. But more than that, can I just ask, we have an emergency plan and an emergency planning group. And I'm just wondering if that plan and the work of that group needs to be looked at, given the experience we're still going through with this emergency. And I'm asking that because, you know, it's not going to go away anytime soon. We're going to be subject to this crisis for quite a long time. And it seems to me that the plans and policies around that need to be looked at quite seriously. And I'm really worried about the comment you've made on capacity. I think capacity has been an issue for this borough for a long time now, in terms of the assets team, the finance team, the legal team, and so on. I think you'll find when you look at licensing, there's been capacity issues there as well. So I think capacity is a really serious issue. And if that hasn't been logged as an issue in our emergency planning, then maybe there's a bit of work that we need to do then. I think unitary is a huge, so we've got three things. We've got Brexit, we've got the COVID-19 crisis, and we've got unitary. Those are three major happenings, aren't they? So one of the other questions I wanted to ask is that we've been told that a test for unitary is going to be whether it's legal and whether it's safe. I just need to know who's going to make that decision, because it's going to be a district and borough, you know, local authority by local authority decision. So is it going to be audit? Is it going to be the auditors? Is it going to be the finance team with the legal team? Who's going to be making those decisions? Thank you.
I'm happy to give an initial response, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
On those three areas, on unitary, sorry, I should have pointed this out, on what is page 13 of your pack, small page 7 of the report, there is a balance of days there, which we've put just to say unitary. We don't quite know what that will be used for, but I know in discussion with Stuart is that as unitary gears up, whether it's looking at the shadow governance structures, the reporting arrangements, transferring over budgets, whatever it may be, there's a balance of days there just held for what might be used for unitary. So it's an open number of days. We don't quite know how that may be utilised, but it could be in line with what you said. But in answer to your question, in terms of is it safe and legal, that wouldn't be a question that internal auditors will answer. I presume it's the accountable officer or you know, the shadow group, but Stuart might be able to answer that. On the other questions around Brexit and capacity, so I think in every review that we do, we'll be professionally skeptical about the risks, particularly of COVID, in every review, whether that's increased fraud risk, capacity challenges, how the changes are being managed. That will just be a natural professional skepticism within every review that we do to see to what extent is that a concern or a theme across the various reviews. We haven't specifically covered it, but we have done a review in the prior years around HR and recruitment, and we'll continue to follow up those actions as well. On Brexit, I know the risk register has, I think, a couple of Brexit risks. One is the local Brexit issue as well as a national one. I think there are 2 risks on there, but Joe may be able to confirm that. We don't have a particular review around Brexit per se, but where we have done this at other local authorities, we've focused on the permutations or the risks that spin off from Brexit. So if it's your supply chain, so is your supply chain a concern because actually you might be reliant on certain subcontractors from certain regions which may have new arrangements, and does that cause difficulty? I mean, it didn't come up as a strong theme in the discussions with heads of service. It didn't really come as a key area for us to focus on, so therefore it wasn't in the plan. Like I said, the plan is flexible and it can change and move, but just echoing back or mirroring the conversations, that supply chain resilience risk around Brexit wasn't something that came up as a key discussion point in February. And obviously at that point, people would have known the risks around Brexit, but it didn't come up as a key theme, so it wasn't included as part of our plan. So I hope that from my point of view anyway, that may cover the 3 points that you had raised.
Yeah. Thank you, Capri. I think what I would add to that, Councillor Stone, is one of the things that I was going to say on the back of this particular part of Capri's report is there is a need for us to look at where we deploy audit resource between now and the year end. And it was one of the things that I've spoken to Stuart about, and Stuart, I think, has agreed to speak to the Chief Exec and Capri and all other interested parties to bring together a revision to that particular piece of work. And when I say piece of work, I don't think it's just this year, it's moving forward as well. I think the issues you raised are obviously pertinent to those particular, that revision. Capri's sort of responses back to you, I think, echo that particular point. So from a process perspective, what I would like to be able to say is that at our next meeting, and I'm prejudging in terms of the work going on behind the scenes, but I think we'd like to be in a position to be able to come back to our meeting with a revision to the audit plan, to enable you and colleagues to give a view in terms of whether it's hitting the points in quite the way that you're looking for. Stuart, I don't know if you want to add anything further to that, given we have had an earlier conversation along similar lines, really.
No, Chair, I mean that's broadly what we've agreed in the discussion, is that we're conscious that the first quarter of this year's sort of gone past. We think we can refocus some of the planned audits to really focus on the key ones, either important to councillors or important to the governance. We are also conscious we've consumed quite a lot of BDO effort in terms of the Bayes grant, so there is a little bit of funding that we need to tweak as well. But more than happy to take Councillor Stone's suggestions and either respond to the committee by email on some of them as to who's best placed. In terms of safe and legal, I'm pretty sure it's the government that decides. I believe all the other parties put in, but I will stand corrected. But I'm pretty sure it's the government that ultimately decides what safe and
Ultimately
legal is.
is right, but the call for it can come from a district or a borough.
Okay, that's. I think that's helpful. It did, in a sense, pick up one of the points I was going to make anyway, in terms of the need to change the report and so on. Have we got any other questions on the stuff that we've heard from Gurpreet so far? Councillor Hibbert. Councillor
Unmute. Thank you, Chair. A lot of the reasons for inclusion of these planned audits mention discussions with senior management. Can you clarify does that mean all department heads are aware of these? And as a secondary question, when you come to the one about NPH, have you included the chief executive NPH in those plans?
So on the first point, yes, we had discussions with each head of service. Stuart and Joe may be able to confirm. I believe it also went to the SMT group as well as in the senior management team group. So that's George Candler and obviously all the heads of service. So they would have seen a draft plan there. On the MPH one, we didn't engage directly with them. I don't know whether the authority did, but Stuart may be able to answer that.
Anything to add, Stuart?
I believe the chief execs have had a conversation. Obviously, this is our internal audit plan, but my understanding is the chief execs have communicated with each other.
Thank you. Any other questions so far? Gurpreet, can I just ask you one other question? I noticed that you've done some work, well, you've reported it back to this committee before around the member-officer relationships, which I think was in your audit plan of last year or certainly from a while back. Can you just refresh my memory in terms of where that is up to? Is that one that's been closed down, as it were, from your perspective?
I might just need a moment to check that, Joe. I don't know if you know offhand, but I might just need to check back to our latest schedule. I don't think it was fully closed down from memory. But
it's not been closed down yet. We're waiting for the Standards Committee to meet again because they've got to review and finalise the new protocol. So I think we were waiting for an update from Francis and Tracy. I don't know if you can interject here because you were on the email.
Have we got Tracy?
Sorry about that. A councillor just called me and I had to put them on hold. Yes, the report is going to Standards Committee a week today. So as soon as that meeting's taken place, I can provide an update to you, Joe. It's on the agenda for that meeting.
So that's on its way. I can see Brian wanting to come in. Brian, Councillor Oldham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to Danielle, Councillor Stone's point with regards whether it's legal or not. I mean, surely I would have thought that it's the government who are in constant contact will say if or ensure whether the West Northampton Council is ready, safe and legal. I would have thought it would have been them that would say that.
Yes, if I come in on that, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm inclined to agree with you on that. But I think from Stuart's earlier comments, we can perhaps get back to Daniel's, in terms of the council's position. But my instinct would be the ultimate call would be with the government. But I'm not an expert in that area. Okay. Can we perhaps go back to Gurpreet to continue with his presentation, Gurpreet?
Well, I think unless there are other questions in terms of the first paper, the audit plan, so agenda item 6, it's whether we can obtain approval of the plan and the charter from this committee, subject to the caveats of where it changes. We will have to come back either outside of committee and liaise with you, Chair, but then also back to committee to notify any changes, or if we can do it in advance, then obviously we can come to the committee and get their approval for each one if things change, which, like I said, I expect them to probably change, but it's whether we can obtain approval on that basis.
Is there any particular reason why we can't give, if you like, the whole package approval if we come back at the end of July, say, with the revised position? Would that be sufficient for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, from our point of view, what we'll be doing after today, and we already have started this to some extent, is contacting certain areas, trying to get a sense from them. I think the critical thing is speaking to each of the heads of service in these areas and saying, when can we do this review? Is it feasible with your current workloads and capacities? Obviously, if in conjunction with any other thoughts that you have, we bring that back, and we might better say, look, this review just can't happen because they don't have the capacity, that, you know, there's too many challenges and it's not going to work for whatever reason, alongside obviously Stuart's assessment of whether we will complete kind of the full number of days, because we've done a lot of other work with the authority in the last couple of months, and your assessments of new risk areas like the the emergency group that you mentioned. I'm not sure when the next committee is.
Well, I haven't to mention that yet, but I think we're looking at the 27th of July. But we've literally done that in the last half hour or so. So hopefully that will be soon enough. And clearly there can be discussions prior to then to sort of nuance the sort of things that you're talking about. So I'd be reasonably confident that we'd be okay with that.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, what would be good then is to almost provisionally say, look, this sounds like let's continue with the areas that we said to focus on, but effectively, I guess, full and final approval of the plan would probably happen then on the 27th of July.
I think that would work well from the council's perspective. Stuart, I'm conscious of, in particular, will have a particular interest in this. Stuart, is what I'm saying, is it feasible from the officer's perspective?
I think from BDO perspective, because this should have been in March, and obviously we contract with them to get them to do work. So I would probably say that for the minutes we are accepting the principle of the plan, because there are certainly some of these that will continue, and we can focus on those in the first tranche, with a view to a revision around the peripheral side of the plan to come to July. But it allows BDO to know that it's engaged, and there's certain key audits we can start kicking off now. Okay.
Capri, does that work okay for you?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, and I'm not hearing any members say there's any particular problem with that. Obviously, we want to make sure the governance is strong as it can be, but at the same time, there are practicalities we've got to cover off. Stuart, did you want to come back in there? No. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, Capri, anything further in terms of your reporting then?
There's one further report which follows the plan. So that's page 23 of your packs. It's our progress report. Obviously, this was the March one for the March committee. So there's for 1920, there's 3 reviews which are left. As asset management, that is pretty much finalized now. We're just waiting for one final management response, so it's almost complete. There's one on disabled facilities grant, which we have got a final course for tomorrow and the day after, so that should be complete in the next couple of days. And then there's one on safeguarding, which I'm not sure on the status of that. I think I'm still waiting for the head of service to confirm whether that's going ahead or not. So from the 1920 plan, we would have completed everything for the July committee, if that's when it is, apart from safeguarding, because we're still waiting for that one in terms of when we may be able to commence. It was rescheduled to take place in the week lockdown started. Clearly, it went out of the window at that point, but we haven't been able to kind of reconnect with the head of service to say, well, when may this now happen? That's not going to get delivered and completed by July. The other 2 will be, and for the July committee, if there is one then, we'll also be issuing our annual opinion. And the fact that safeguarding one won't be done by then doesn't change the fact that we'll be able to issue an opinion. So we should be able to still issue our full opinion for the July committee. So there's not necessarily anything new there, but that's just by way of an update on where we are with 1920 internal audit work.
Okay. Any comments, questions from members on that? No, I'm not hearing any. Do you want to say anything, Gurpreet, in terms of the local government sector update? I suppose that's a coded way for me saying, are there things that you've picked up that members might find interesting in terms of the wider sector position, particularly over the last 3 months or so?
Well, on this sector update is actually the one we wrote in March, and it's the same paper that's been issued now. So it's probably some of the elements of the update here are out of date. I mean, as a whole, we've held quite a few sessions with local authorities or different heads of internal audit across local government, and some of the key things that are seen as the key risks. So we ran a survey recently, a couple of weeks ago, where IT and data is seen as one of the most critical risks. Obviously, we've done cyber reviews in the past year and we're following those up. But whether that's new devices, remote working, the use of Zoom, and whether it's a safe platform, or all the various things around IT and data and managing all of that and cyber risks, etc. I think phishing emails have gone up by about 600% in the last couple of months. So, you know, unfortunately, fraudsters will use this time of vulnerability or you know, new controlled environments to try and expose that. So, you know, increased kind of IT and fraud risks is a key thing we're seeing. Clearly, your financial positions as authorities are going to be under strain. I mean, some authorities have heavy reliance on income, whether that's parking or planning income, or if they have commercial activities, a lot of those will be significantly reduced. So the pressure on budgets and a financial position is going to be quite challenging. Well-being and mental health, again, is a key one around staff working remotely and how we make sure that they're being supported and that the culture of an organisation and the values of the organisation remain is a critical area. And then there's a couple of others which are quite pertinent, which was around continuity arrangements. Because to some extent, people could look at business continuity and say, well, clearly business continuity has worked because we've managed to continue working and operating and we're working remotely. But actually now is the time to refresh business continuity plans, make sure that they're up to date and up to speed. Nobody's continuity plans would have predicted a multiple month lockdown across local government, NHS, or any parts of public or private sector. You know, very few would have done. And so now is a good time to make sure they're refreshed, that they're fit for purpose, especially if we have a second wave later in the year, which, you know, nobody knows whether that happens or not, is to make sure that continuity arrangements are as sound as they can be for that. So, I mean, I think we all could talk for a very long time about the various risks that have come out of this, but they're some of the key ones out of some surveys and workshops that we've been doing recently that have been impacting the sector.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks for that. And I'm sure when we were talking before about you know, your audit planning amongst other things, then that's the probably issues there that we need to be aware of, either to form part of your plan or just the general well-being of the council in its widest sense. So thanks for those particular comments. Any comments on that? I can see a finger there from Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. I always find that part of the report one of the most interesting parts, actually, and I would really welcome the opportunity to discuss it much further and have a proper briefing about it. Do you think that might be a possibility, that we could have a members' briefing on a local government sector update? I think I would find it really useful, and I think other people would as well.
Yeah, so we're happy to kind of do that kind of thing if that's what you were thinking. I mean, we do have a newer sector update than the one you would have received here, because this is the one back from March. We do them every month. Obviously, for the next papers, we would issue that. But if you wanted BDO to be involved in that and to have a session which is, you know, slightly earlier than the next audit committee, and myself and Greg can join that, and whether there's external audit colleagues or along with Stuart and others, whether we do an update on what we're seeing from speaking to other authorities, then I'm more than happy to be involved in that.
Yeah, thanks, Capri. And I think Councillor Stone's question is a really good one. I would certainly support that. I think it makes a lot of sense. The only sort of supplementary question I would ask there is, I suppose it's questionable as to whether that sort of briefing comes to just the audit committee, or it's a briefing to the sort of wider membership of members across the council. What I was going to suggest was maybe if Stuart can perhaps take that question back to see if there is anything on a wider council basis that might be appreciated.
I'll have a chat with Tracy and see what we can sort out through the democratic services process.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments from that, or shall we wait to see the big show when it arrives in due course? Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you for that, Capri. I think that finishes your session for this evening. Helpful as usual. Thank you very much. If we can,
I was just going to say there is one further. There is a follow-up. There is a follow-up document which is on page 33 of your packs as well, just before LGSS's paper. I think this is the one that may be produced internally. This will be slightly dated because I think it's from March. It would be more up to date. So I'm not particularly sure how helpful maybe a discussion around it may be. But if you do have any particular concerns, I know you've talked about member officer protocol. That it shows the recommendations there. So that will now be updated. We'll have a full update for the July committee. But if anyone else has any questions around follow-up, I'm happy to take them.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? No, so we'll see it in your July report, Gurpreet.
Cool. Thank you.
Any questions there would be, I'm sure, answered. So I'll get it right this time. Thank you for your presentation. Moves us on to LGSS, which I think Stuart is in the chair for that one.
Apologies. So because we're conscious these are the papers from March that we're sort of catching up on, haven't brought LGSS into the room, so I'm just going to literally invite the paper. LGSS provide us with an assurance. They're not so much an internal audit function as an assurance function. They give us an assurance that the services LGSS delivers on our behalf are functioning, and this just highlights that they are doing what they're supposed to do. But certainly for the July meet, we would actually get a revised, updated view from LGSS and bring them to the room. So unless there's any specific questions, just ask the committee to note it, really.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. And as you've said, I think if they're live, as it were, in July, that will help. The obvious one for me was just I think the report at 4.2 recommends some actions not being implemented, and I just wonder, do you happen to know the position there, or do we need to wait until LGSS come along?
Joe and I are sort of in constant discussions with LGSS on terms of bits that they're not necessarily doing, and some of that is some of the checks and balances that we would prefer that they did on a quarterly basis. So they do it, they just don't necessarily do it in the timely way that we would like. But I'll get an updated paper for July, and then we can have a proper discussion with them. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Stuart on that particular paper? No. Okay. If we move on to item 8, which I think is back to Stuart again. So thank you, Chair. So this really is a catch-all paper, which we haven't always done, but it seems the fastest way of running through some of the agenda. So really, it's a case of just highlighting that we've not got any accounting policy changes per se. We have no specific Treasury changes, but I have made the committee aware that we've been carrying around about 37 million in shorter accounts than we would normally do for that scale of money, but that's because we're holding the Bayes grant money. Well, we were holding the Bayes grant money, and we've been distributing it at speed over the last 12 weeks. Then it's a case of the statement of accounts for 18-19 are still in the process of being audited. Our auditor is in the room and I'm sure will express a view, but we believe that we will be continuing that audit from October now. And the teams are currently trying to pull together the 19-20. We had hoped that they would be prepared for the July meeting, and we still have that ambition, but they may be distributed later than we would want if we meet that date. But we're still hopeful we might have the draft accounts for 19-20, but obviously they will always be a draft until we've closed 18-19 off properly, because closing balances impact on opening balances. Probably the item of interest really is around the budget risk for the current year. So committee members have been guided to the cabinet paper from the 27th of May, where there was an initial view of some of the risks and issues facing the council. It's still quite early. It was definitely early in May, and we're still refining what true costs are out there. We are in the process of preparing the July cabinet report, 22nd of July, and we'll actually have some more information going into that report. The main drivers for us are as we've sort of highlighted to MHCLG, there is an impact on council tax. We're all predicating around Northamptonshire about a 5% reduction in the collection fund from council tax, which will probably have a bigger impact on the unitary than directly on us in year. We know that whilst we've had the lockdown, we've had 3 months worth of free car parking, which is sort of good for the residents, but not necessarily helpful for our income, because we still have to pay business rates, so we can't award any relief, and obviously we pay utilities and still manage and maintain the car parks but have no income coming through. So we will in July be reporting what 3 months worth of lost parking income looks like. That obviously also impacts on some of the season ticket sales as well. And then we'll be taking an educated view as to what that might look like for the rest of the year. The other area that we know there's big impact is around the housing directorate, and part of that is the rough sleeper initiatives, which have been really welcomed. It's certainly making a difference, but there's a cost. Government initially gave us 21,000 towards what is probably close to a £300,000 bill. They've just agreed to realign some further funds, but that will still leave us about 200,000 light in that particular scheme. Obviously, Councillor Hibbert is the portfolio holder, so if I err, he'll correct us. But at the same time, we are still under pressure from homelessness and temporary accommodation, and obviously once the lockdown eases, we expect more people that have perhaps been isolating in certain homes to possibly not be able to stay there. At the same time, we can't move people on that we've housed but don't have an entitlement to temporary accommodation, so we may have judged that they're no longer entitled, but we're still picking up those costs. So housing as a directorate is probably one of the greatest service cost risks, and I think we've predicated in most of the reports that we're estimating around about £1 million pressure. We're still keeping tabs on anything in terms of the COVID itself and the continuity planning that Gurpreet mentioned, and in discussion with EY when we talked to them straight afterwards. Most councillors have commended the officers in managing to actually operate near enough all services pretty quickly. We were very fortunate that our IT colleagues did a preemptive couple of weekends that actually enabled us to take what are traditionally tabletop PCs out of the building, which have never worked in that way, but they managed to do some network tweaks that meant that we didn't have to go out and try and source 300 laptops at the same time as everybody else, knowing that all the retailers have closed as well. So we've still got some challenges, and we're still learning some of the video conference techniques and which licenses we need to do. So there's still some more cost to come through, but in the main, we mobilised all the staff very rapidly, and it's kept the secure nature that we need to do for our data protection as well. But in terms of the budget risk, we're obviously keeping an eye on all the costs. We're beginning to reach the new normal now. in some ways. We still have some legacy costs coming through from, say, the Revs and Ben service, because council tax reduction scheme claimants are increasing materially through universal credit. So that's putting a lot of pressure on the service. Obviously, they administered the Bays grants for us as well, which was a big piece of work. So we're still sort of counting the absolute cost, and looking at whether there are income pressures beyond car parking. Our commercial income is not too bad. We have quite a limited portfolio. The larger ones are relatively stable. So we are just looking around some of the smaller occupants. So again, there may be some risk, but not necessarily as big as other councils. We're not as reliant on that commercial income as others. To that end, as pointed out, we do carry the general fund reserve of 4 million. We are hopeful that we will get some more government funding. So we are not on the brink, but if we were to consume all of those reserves, it would mean we lack the reserves for normal risk issues and services. So that would be it, Chair, and then I would guide people to the recommendations, 2.11 and through to 2.14 once you've had your discussion.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. That was helpful. Can I open that up then for any questions of what Stuart's just mentioned? Any particular points people wish to raise? Is that, sorry, Councillor Stone? Yes, one from Councillor Stone, I think.
Thank you. It's deeply worrying, it seems to me, the budget gap that's emerging. £4 million general reserves isn't going to meet our requirements, isn't it? Because we need the reserves and we need to maintain them. So if we have to spend them to manage the budget gap, that's going to be pretty tricky. So there is talk through other local authorities about the possibility of 114 notices being issued. Can you give us an assurance that we're not looking at that eventuality in the borough? And could you confirm that I think we get £1 million a year from parking? I'm sure that must have been a bit problematic over the recent crisis. So perhaps you could comment on that. And the big thing I'm really worried about is that we know the government has told landlords they mustn't evict people during the COVID crisis, which means that there's going to be a bulge of evictions probably in the autumn, end of September, October, November, which is going to put our housing service under the most enormous pressure and quite possibly undo all the good that's been done with the homelessness strategy thus far. So I'm just wondering if there's been any predictions about what that might look like in terms of numbers, costs, capacity of staff and so on, and what we're going to do to mitigate that risk.
Can I just, before handing that over to Stuart, just something I wanted to clarify with him from the early points you were making, Councillor Stone, because I've not at the moment, Stuart, and correct me if I've got this wrong, got the impression that we think we're in a position where the reserves won't be sufficient and therefore could be going down the section 114 route. But I guess the caveat to that is that at the moment it may well be too soon to actually say that with absolute certainty. But my interpretation from what you said was that there are clearly risks and pressures in there. But I didn't get the impression it was taken as quite to the extent that I think I heard Councillor Stone say. So just, it might be helpful if you just clarify that before picking up the other points.
Yes, yeah. So we're taking a paper to Cabinet on the 22nd of July, and that will be informed by the numbers that we actually know are occurring this year. One of the drivers in the main is actually from the car parking income in terms of what we perceive throughout the rest of the year. The housing pressures we're watching, but then again, it's how are we going to address those? So we have contained quite a lot of the cost, and we've got a lot of initiatives running. We've lost Councillor Hibbert, but his portfolio is working hard at all the options of acquisitions, alternative housing, etc. So there's a lot of initiatives and a lot of work going on to try to mitigate and minimise. What Cabinet will have in July will be some options as to whether they wish to put forward some savings in year. What does that look like? Is it people? Is it some initiatives that we were going to do but they may choose to not do? Do they wish to draw from some other reserves that perhaps were targeted for some earmarked projects? That may have an impact on the unitary. And it may have some impact on some schemes. So all of these options will need to go forward to Cabinet on the 22nd of July. In terms of a 114, we're not in a position where we need to consider it today, and I wouldn't anticipate it in July. But each day the government announces new requirements and new demands. We hadn't planned to put rough sleepers in a hotel immediately. So the government initiative was there. The funding that came forward was only 21,000 as opposed to what was promised. So until we actually know whether there's any more initiatives that we have to self-finance or are at risk until the government tells us funding, we can't say it would never be the case, but I think it would have to be really catastrophic for us to have to consider that. There are lots of other options which may not be palatable, but are politically available to avoid a 114.
I think it's fair to say as well, Stuart, the 114 issue, slightly odd given the circumstances of lots of authorities being in similar positions. Traditionally, if that's quite the right word with 114s, they are used obviously extremely infrequently, but there's, in my experience, there's usually some local reason for it. Whereas I think what we've got at the moment is clearly not the case. So this is probably just a personal view. I'm not convinced that the 114 route is necessarily, going to help things along in the current circumstances. But I'd say that's just a personal view. Conscious there was a lot in your response, Stuart, and there was a lot from Councillor Stone in terms of a question as well. Councillor Stone, were the key points covered off there for you?
It sounds as if they will be at Cabinet, so I'll be attending Cabinet.
Yes. Any other questions? I've got a couple of my own, but any other questions that people wish to ask? No, a couple from me, Stuart, if I may. You've already touched on the need to for a Cabinet report that will try and bring things as clear as possible at the end of July, although I would guess there will still be quite a lot of unknowns and risks, pressures and so on, so it'd be quite a difficult paper. But you mentioned that the Corporate Management Board were pulling together proposals. Are they being worked on as we speak, as it were? Thank you. And the other thing for me that would be useful is can you give us some idea of how the council are engaging with central government to sort of maximise possible sort of funding sources and so on? What sort of discussions are taking place, and is there a for want of a better expression, a cause for optimism there?
So we have two real streams as part of the districts and borough network society district treasurers. There's obviously a lobbying position there. There's lobbying through LGA through that route, and because of our unique circumstances going forward to unitary, then the county-wide authorities through the shadow authority, and the commissioners are engaging with government to sort of set out the stall that yes, we could consume some limited resources, reserves, but that will make it very difficult for the unitary to launch safely. So there is a balance there as to how the funding streams go. But yeah, we are engaging through every route. In terms of some of the grants, we've got a local regional BASE contact who has been quite helpful in understanding some of the funding and grants that's available to our businesses in particular. So that's given us some quite good signposting. But just about every group is actively seeking a pathway to MHCLG, and the housing in particular has been used as a bit of a pilot. So it doesn't necessarily get us more money, but we get the issues vocalised quite quickly as well.
Okay, thanks for that. And if I can just add one other from my perspective, I guess one of the difficulties in terms of quantifying things at the moment is there are some things that they'll create problems, but we would hope they would be one-off, and then there'll be other issues that we'll be living with for years, possibly decades. And just to take one of those in isolation, really, I just wondered, has the council got any sense of the impact on the business community? What I'm sort of driving at there is there any sense of how many businesses, if you like, may not come through this, and what the sort of impact on that might be on jobs in particular?
So one of my colleagues is actually leading on the economic recovery cell, Kevin Langley, and they're doing a lot of work with BASE, with FSB. Certainly the Cabinet has done quite a lot of work with Federation of Small Businesses, the BID, both BIDs, Chambers of Commerce. So as sort of Councillor Eldred pointed out at the last council meeting, we've distributed nearly 2,600 grants, which is worth just over, well, close to £33 million, and there's £34 million of business rate relief going through as well. So we know there are some specific pockets of hardship. Where we get feedback from those, then Kevin is feeding that back up to the BASE regional areas. So when we see some of the national comments about, people have spotted a gap in the grant thing, whether it's not falling into the furlough or not getting the property-based grants, and that's where BASE grant discretionary fund came through, because we became aware that there were a lot of people that didn't pay business rates, but were suffering closure. So it could be a cafe within a building where it's part of the service charge. So him and his colleagues have been working hard with the leader and various portfolio holders to work out how to build a discretionary fund that targeted those businesses that had fallen between the gaps, or as many as we could. So sadly, the discretionary fund is only 1.7 million, so it's not a lot of money. And they've been very proactive, reaching out to the different groups to target them. We're doing a lot of signposting. We're working quite a lot with our cultural colleagues and leisure colleagues and other organisations where we don't have access to funds. We can't necessarily support our business community, but we are being really proactive, and again in conjunction with the county and the rest of the districts and boroughs, to focus people on where they can, the business interruption loans, and we're trying to sort of facilitate all of that, because it's as much about signposting to alleviate issues as being able to offer a pound. So a lot of our resource is actually being consumed in trying to support people through guiding them to other people's processes. In terms of what the hit will be, I would have to get my EAC colleagues to give you the full economic brief, but I think from my understanding of some of the work we've done on future high street funds and things like that, we have quite a varied economy. So we do have some large financial institution employers that should weather the storm well. We've got some manufacturing, but we do have quite a diverse economy. So we're not wholly reliant on one single employer or one industry. So it will be how to protect the pockets. And people are now actively looking at the recovery and the bounce back initiatives. What can we do that's constructive? And if we do spend some money on grants or something like that, how do we leverage more money from somewhere else?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. I can see Councillor Oldham.
Can you see me? I indicated.
Sorry, Councillor Murray. Can I take Councillor Oldham and then come back to Councillor Murray?
Well, I indicated when Councillor Stone did. Can't you see my indication?
Sorry, say that again.
I indicated when Councillor Stone came in. Couldn't you see that?
Oh, I'm sorry if I do apologise if I missed that.
Right.
I do
I'm
apologise.
quite all right. If
We'll
Les
come
wants
back.
to, if
Councillor Oldham, we can't hear.
oh, as well, the host muted me. I was just saying if Les wants to go first, I'm quite all right with that. But it's a very simple question. Is that with regards to 3.6.1, Stuart, KPMG have got a part to play in getting these statement of accounts finished for 2018 and 19 and 2019 and 20. We've got to have these statement of accounts by law done before we go into unitary. Will they be done before the Borough Council cease to be in existence?
So just to respond very quickly on that, 3.6.1 for KPMG is actually purely about the housing benefit claims. So that's separate to our core audit that's being conducted by EY. I'll allow EY to update on that. Not having the accounts fully completed wouldn't change the move to unitary, because councils never actually die, they just morph, merge and change shape. So it would be a legacy issue for the new authority, but it wouldn't prevent them from launching. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Marriott?
Well, my first question is going to be then is there any point in us actually writing in questions before this? Because at the end of the day, you know, you get an answer, but I would have thought that this would be some stage you ask if there's a supplementary. But obviously that hasn't happened in my case. You know, I'm not quite sure why I needed to write in and ask Stuart the question. I could easily ask him on the evening. But anyway, follow up to the question, because obviously Stuart was kind enough to send a response out. Spent his Sunday actually writing a response out. The part of it is actually, to me, asking about council tax is mentioned quite a bit in his contribution about council tax. It's not just about the council's budget, it's the impact on the residents I was obviously interested in going forward. But one thing that obviously when I had a conversation with Stuart about it, because obviously he rang me to say exactly what I needed, there's quite a bit of detail behind council tax. And I just think it would be appropriate if Stuart at some stage would give all councillors, if not just on this committee, a briefing on what lies behind that information is provided on council tax.
Stuart, any thoughts on that? Is that a nod?
That's a nod. I've explained some of it to Councillor Marriott, and yes, we are watching all the detail running through at the moment. And again, you know, we hope to have some more detail for the end of July, and there is some value in providing a bit more assurance and detail as requested. Okay,
so that can be part of the next report into our committee. Okay, thank you. Okay, any more questions on Stuart's paper? No. I think Stuart before was giving me a hint to read the recommendation. So it's recommended the committee note progress towards completing statement of accounts for 18-19 and 19-20. Note the risks on the 2021 budget. Note there have been no changes to accounting policies, and that there have been no reportable incidents in respect of treasury management or requirements to change treasury management policies. So hopefully the committee are okay with that. Thank you. Right, item 9 is external audits update, which I don't think we've got any papers, but we've got Steve Clark with us, I think. Steve, hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hello, Steve.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Good evening, councillors. Yeah. Hi. This is a verbal update. So we have. It's been quite a long time in gestation in terms of getting into the actual audit process. We produced a plan which we presented to this committee back in February. We have been undertaking a level of work in respect of the detailed audit for a period of time. We have encountered some challenges between ourselves and LGSS in terms of the information that we're getting, and we've had some queries that we've left with the council, and we've had some good liaison with Stuart. So we think we're getting to a position of getting those queries responded to. We have had equally some sickness on our side, including the main, what we call senior in charge on the audit, who has had some long-term sickness issues, which has caused some disruption at our end. Our proposal is therefore that we come back in, I think it's October, when we will have a full team available to us to be able to complete the audit as efficiently and effectively as possible. To give you an idea of that, at the current time, from the information that we've provided to Stuart, we've spent something like just under 1,900 hours on the audit to date. Our estimated time to complete is something in the region of just under 1,700 hours. From the information available, that clearly though is a little dependent on the information that we get back in terms of supporting evidence. I think it's fair to say, and I think one of the councillors, and apologies, forgot who was mentioned it earlier, is that as the council moves towards reorganisation, the view tends to be much more forward-looking about the new entity, and therefore there are challenges around the capacity available to undertake, for want of a better word, legacy activities like what will be the 18-19, 19-20, and then the 2021 accounts. Going forward, linked to that has also been COVID-19, which, as Stuart has said, has been actually pretty positive for the council and for many other councils in the context of core services, but does lead to a little bit of disruption on a day-to-day basis. We also need to consider that and factor that in the context of where our report and opinion work goes for 18-19 and 19-20. It's relatively little impact on 18-19. It's more it's more about what the opinion is in respect of going concern and those types of considerations, which with the dissolving council are not a normal steady state of play anyway, as Stuart has alluded to. So clearly the deadline, as we move towards that kind of 31st of March next year period, becomes tighter, but we're aiming to get the 18-19 accounts out of the way as soon as we can, move on to 19-20 pretty quickly, and then 2021 inevitably is a legacy set of accounts which can't be undertaken until after the old authority is dissolved anyway.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm not cutting you off there, am I, Steve?
No, it's fine.
I sense there was a pause. Stuart, is there anything you want to particularly say at this juncture?
other than we are working closely, obviously the increase in fee is something we are still going to have to resolve. It feels high, and we're in discussions with EY over that. We're disappointed that we can't progress the audit faster. We are both, EY and ourselves, in discussions with LGSS about the resourcing aspect, as mentioned by Councillor Stone, some concerns, to make sure that we actually do get to progress to the October, and then making sure everything is stacked up and ready to go straight from 18-19 into 19-20. I think collectively as CFOs within the area, we're anticipating a very fast close down for 2021. Notwithstanding that we've got to wait for the authority to close, but there's certainly steps that we can do to minimise noise in the last February, March for sort of random transactions, and certainly people in the past and commercial organisations do a soft close and then just have the last 4 weeks to audit. So the issue really is for the unitary in its planning in the summer, not having an assurance that all 18-19 accounts are signed off, for them to understand the baseline. 19-20 should be reasoned draft, so it may impact on the unitary's planning. They may have a bit of a treasury gap, shall we say, going, we think the reserve could be 4 to 6 million, as opposed to knowing it's 6 or 4. So that will probably make their budget planning assumptions more difficult.
Okay. Can I just come back? I suspect it's to Steve. It may be Stuart. Just so that I'm clear, in terms of 18-19, when do we think we will be complete? And by complete, I mean the audit having been completed.
Well, ideally, I'd like to get it signed off by the end of the calendar year. This
calendar year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ideally, I would like it signed off at the end of October, but we have to manage each other's expectation.
Yeah. I think as soon as we can get through it, we will. Is the answer to that. We understand the timelines that you're working to.
And in terms of the fees, I don't want to get into rehearsing the argument about the fees now, for pretty obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But where is that discussion at the moment? And where will it be, and when will it be resolved?
So the fee discussion is not a straightforward one, as it isn't with certain other of the councils in the borough, in the context of where we've come from and how long we've, as I say, been familiarising ourselves with the council. The way that I propose that we deal with this, which is the same basis that I'm proposing with the county, is that so that the bases are both the same, is that clearly we have a period of time that we were, for want of a better word, familiarising ourselves with the council and debating a number of issues, which is kind of in the run up to when KPMG signed the accounts, and forgive me, I know it was the back end of last year, I can't remember the exact month, I'm sure Stuart will know. That time in effect is on the clock. You then have a period of time when we have had a team on site for a period of weeks and substantively during the principally the 2020 calendar year, and again that time is on the clock. So that time is kind of time that has been incurred and burnt, for want of a better word. And that is a matter of fact. We then have a period which is for want of a better word, a best estimate for our time to complete the work. My take is that we are as open and transparent with those hours with the council. We've shared them with Stuart today. I'm happy to continue to share those. I think that the way where the fee is the most sensible way forward is that it bears no relation to the actual scale fee for the council. Neither did KPMG's previous fees. That's not a surprise. My take is that we agree as far as we can a position. I don't expect necessarily the council will agree to all of it, and ultimately the contractual position is that the PSAA are the ultimate arbiters of the fee. So ultimately, where we don't necessarily agree, then we debate it with PSAA and they come to a position. Ultimately, that's the way forward. We have provided them with where we are with that. What I would like to do is to get that resolved as quick as possible. I don't necessarily mean that we will agree an absolute fee, because I think the most effective or the most efficient way of doing it is to actually get agreement as a basis on how we share the hours that we're due to incur to complete the fee, because that's the kind of finger in the air, and that's I just think it's about being as transparent as we can.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Stone.
I have to say, Chair, that I feel really less than reassured about what is going on here. I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are two areas of fragility here. One is LGSS lacking capacity to give us information, and the other one is external auditors' lack of capacity to deliver the service. And I am absolutely amazed that we are in such difficult times, facing, rapid change. We're being transformed into a unitary. We've got a whole backlog of stuff that we need to understand and get to grips with. And I feel really, really concerned about the position we're in. And I would want much more reassurance that we've got, a robust situation with the auditors working as hard as they can and getting the correct information when they need it out of LGSS. I feel really, really concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. I can see exactly where you're coming from in terms of those comments. Stuart, can I just ask you, in terms of process within the council, I think Councillor Stone makes some good points about why we've arrived at this position. Can you just say what the plan is here, so that members are aware, and it may well be that there needs to be further discussion on this issue, because there's clearly history here, but what is clearly the case to me is that the fee level, for whatever reason, is huge compared to what I would expect a council of our size to be paying. But anyway, I won't say any more. Stuart, can you give us your take on this?
I think I need to bring an update to July to Audit Committee. What we're aware of is we contract with LGSS to deliver a financial service, and that includes year-end statement of accounts. The owners of LGSS have realigned and moved some of the services more in-house, repatriation, etc. As a client, we are coming to understand what that means for us. So I just recently started liaising with a new contact within NCC, who are the host now for us, as opposed to just pure LGSS. And they're looking at the resourcing issues, which is a conversation I had literally this week. Once we understand that, and it's two ways, because we believe the portal has sufficient information in it to a reasonable standard. Until EY actually check the portal and respond to say whether that is or isn't adequate, we don't know whether we have or haven't completed our accounts. And so what we're doing now with some new resource is to actually go back into the portal to revisit, so that we're even more confident that what we've put in there is correct. And then it's up to EY to actually do the auditing. But you know, that's as far as I can offer you today. Okay, thanks for that. So in terms, let me just be clear, Stu, in terms of our July meeting, it's reasonable of us to expect a position statement on this issue, and hopefully some indication of steps forward, etc. I'm happy that you know, that can be done by then, which is a reasonably tight turnaround. And then clearly, you know, that it's for members of the committee. Clearly, Councillor Stone's already raised questions, but for any members of this committee to raise any issues of concern. But I think it is important that we get some, you know, greater clarity on this issue going forward. Councillor Oldham, I think I saw your hand. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It goes back to the point I made about 10 minutes ago to both Stuart and Steve. If this matter is unresolved, is there still a danger that by the time we exit the Borough Council, this matter of the fees could still be outstanding? Where do we go then?
It just rolls into, so the borough never dies, for want of a better phrase. We will roll it up. So as EY mentioned, the going concern, councils never actually end, they just change shape. So all liabilities, all assets for all councils move into the next version, or they're disaggregated. They never actually come to an end. So if it's an unresolved matter, it will be an accrual going forward into the new authority, but no different than if we hand over a building, we're handing over an asset as well. So it won't actually impact on the process. But what I would seek to do is to, in the past, we've actually brought a senior in from LGSS to explain progress on statement of accounts. So I think I would probably seek to invite a new colleague to come and explain how the resourcing's working.
Thank you, Stuart and Councillor Oldham there. I guess the overriding thing for me, following on from that particular part of the discussion, is, you know, ultimately we are concerned here with the efficient use of public money, and that's the bit that should be, you know, the primary concern here. But let's see the paper in July, and I suspect we'll have another conversation on this. Steve, do you want to come back in on this?
Yeah, I think, you know, Councillor Stone and Councillor Oldham both raised very valid points, and I won't dwell on this, but I'm happy to do it. Is that clearly at the point that we took over the audit process, we'd lost something in the region of, I don't know, probably a good 15 months. I'd need to do the timeline, possibly a little bit more, from when we should have started. I don't really want to regurgitate the history because it is just that, but it is fact. And equally, the local government reorganisation deadline is neither of our making, nor necessarily all of yours collectively. Therefore, whilst we will do as much as we reasonably can in the context of the information we have and the resource available, you know, the situation we are in is not of our making. You know, and as Stuart has said, you know, in the context of LGSS, now that has fundamentally changed in respect of how it operates and the repatriation. That is equally not of the borough's making, but it's a situation you're trying to deal with. So I understand your concerns re the fragility.
Thank you for that, Steve. Councillor Stone, do you want to come back in?
I just want to say, Chair, I think this is a really, really important issue and a very, very sorry state of affairs. And this bodes really badly for transformation and reorganisation. You know, if we can't manage this in terms of our own budget situation, what on earth is going to be going on with the reorganisation into unitary? I find it deeply disturbing. We know that EY have had resource issues, haven't you? You've had resource issues. LGSS has had resource issues. The promise that we've been made with reorganisation is that nobody will feel it. You know, services won't be impacted. There won't be a deficit. That looks to be increasingly unlikely given what we've just heard.
Yeah, thanks for your comments there, Councillor Stone. I don't want to get into sort of trying to dispute any of that in any way, shape or form. The only thing I would say is I think if we were, as a committee, able to have a fuller picture of this, I think that would help in terms of giving us a position or helping develop our position to say, you know, this is where the problem is, we are not happy with X, etc. I feel at the moment, and I suspect other people are in the same position, is there is a sense of, if you like, things being adrift, not as we'd actually like them to be. That's clearly the case, given the fee alone. But I think if we had more information on, you know, the root causes of some of this, that would help us make a more informed decision in terms of what we do in terms of taking the issue forward. And that, to say, in no way is that me trying to challenge what you're saying. I think we are saying similar things. I think all I'm saying is let's just have all of the information available, and then we can make perhaps a more informed judgment than perhaps we're in danger of making at the moment. Any other comments? Sorry, Councillor Oldham, did I see a hand? No, okay. Okay, thanks for that, Steve, that update, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again in due course, but thanks for your time. Okay, item 10, Joe, I think you've been waiting patiently to present this one, the governance report.
Yes.
Over to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you. As you can imagine, the senior management team and the managers at MBC have been consumed by the COVID-19 emergency response. The corporate risk register for Q3 was rolled over for Q4, so it hasn't been updated, but just kind of refreshed. What I would like to add to that is, in addition to the corporate risk register, there is a project risk register for the COVID-19. So we have one for the tactical command group and one for the strategic command group. So focus has been on that risk rather than looking at the corporate risk. However, I will be looking to update this in July 2020. So if I can get it ready for the next audit committee, then I'll certainly, you know, present it there. And the Q3, there were 2 additions to the risk register. We've got one for the climate change, which is sustainability basically, and the other one was the impact of the loss of the LGSS services, which is an ongoing issue. If I move on to page, move on to page 51, which is the start of the governance report. That has information about the governance team and the work that we carry out. On the last audit committee, we were requested to give give benchmarking information on the GDPR. You're interested in how the data breach has kind of shaped up to the other authorities. On page 58, David Taylor, our data protection officer, has given some information there. He's not overly concerned that we're, worse than any other local authority. I think we're in line with what goes on with the other ones. Yeah. Unless anybody's got any concerns themselves that I can go back to David with. No. The other thing that was asked for at the last audit committee was more information on around the temporary workers register. I do apologise, but the format that's come out on the papers is not particularly easy to read. So I don't know if you've had time to have a look through and see if there's any particular item that you would like more information on. We will certainly do an update for the July audit committee in a format that'll be a lot easier for you to actually read and digest.
Thank you. Councillor Stone, yeah.
Just very quickly, thank you very much for all the information and for the GDPR information as well. Can I just ask, when we're appointing temporary and interims, who makes that decision?
Well, as in the decision to actually take them on in a position or to interview them?
No, who makes the decision that posts are going to be filled by temporary appointments?
Stuart, do you want to answer that one? I think it's more a CMB decision.
It's basically depends on the post and the need. So as we said earlier, if we've got grant funded posts for 6 months, we will not recruit permanent people because it's a 6 months assignment. So we will use agencies or fixed term appointments. So they become an employee, but on a fixed term appointment for 6 months. And then it's a case of going out for the normal permanent posts. If there's a need, so if there's an officer post that's a statutory delivery and we must have one, if we misplace ours, we will go out for interim or agency immediately because it's a statutory role, a statutory duty, and we need a body in the post with the right qualifications. So we would immediately go for agency or interim whilst we're doing a proper recruitment, ideally. As we get closer to the wire now, we only have 9 months. It's unlikely that we will do much more permanent recruiting because we'll be looking at making sure that we don't have too many permanent staff if someone does do a reorganisation. But where there are key roles that actually we know will migrate into the unitary, we will still continue. But it's up to the individual directorate and heads of service, unless it's a very senior role, in which case you're then into the appointment and appeals panel, chief exec area, and so on. But basically, it's a service need as to how fast do we need to replace the person that drives some of that decision. Does that help?
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you for that. I'm just a bit worried that we have some really important posts, 3 in the legal department, I'm reading, where we've got temporary. I understand what you're saying. We don't want to take on full-timers who are then just going to be made redundant. I do understand that. But I am also mindful of the fact that when we have, temporary people coming in, they have to learn the job, learn the organisation, do a lot of learning, and then the job is over and done. And it seems to me, that it's not a cost-effective way of managing a service. It's not an effective way.
So just, Chair, if I may, just to close it off. So again, my understanding from my HR department, Joe and Karen regularly test all the services. So as I said before, the driver is, we actually do need that capacity. My understanding is that they've done external recruiting regularly. That's part of the reason we end up using interims, is if they fail too many times to persuade somebody to come and join us, and we need the work doing, rather than carry the vacancy, we employ an appropriately qualified agency or interim. Certainly now with 9 months to go, there certainly would be an issue around many more permanent recruitments, unless it's a role that's absolutely guaranteed to go forward. But it's not anybody's preferred choice. Everybody would prefer to have permanent, but sometimes the market works against us in specific roles.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Marriott, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is the right report or whether I should have brought in on Stuart's previous report. I've had a discussion with Stuart, and unfortunately he didn't actually do a report for it, but he did say he was going to comment on it tonight. I asked him about the business grants that have been given out. It's part of the COVID stuff. Obviously, Northampton Borough Council was criticised quite broadly, actually, for being very slow in giving the initial grants out to small business. And I know that there's another tranche coming up. Now, Stuart's got an explanation for that, and I just hope he can expand a little bit on that now, because I'd say we did have a discussion on it, and he did say that he'd probably make some comment about it tonight. So if that's okay.
Stuart?
So yes, my apologies to Councillor Marriott. I have a number of post-it notes and I missed that one. So the borough did take a bit of a knock at initially, but actually this is the scheme presented to us was, can we distribute £37 million? Our gross budget is 30 million. So in actually racing forward, the government had initially assumed that everybody paid business rates through direct debit, and therefore we would just reverse the flow of money. In broad order, we only had about 100 people that paid by direct debit. So that meant we needed to create a system that enabled us to actually find people, use a portal to allow them to send us some information. There were lots of challenges because normally we would just walk around the roads, pop into someone's premises, and we would know they were them, they would know we are us, and we could do the transaction. It became very difficult knowing that actually how do you communicate and find these people. So we did take a bit of time at the beginning to make sure that our due diligence was appropriate. And BDO have done a lot of work with us, both to actually test the systems and everything initially, and then we used a different part of BDO to provide a lot of assurance. So we did a lot of pre-checks to make sure we were content with every single payment. We've issued around about 2,600 grants, which is about 32.2 million. And through the second scheme, they've already issued about 850,000, and we're using a commercial portal. What's interesting in the latest government guidance is there's a very big emphasis on fraud and theft. The concern was actually if we gave away a grant of 25,000, actually it was the council taxpayers locally that would have to pick up the bill if we couldn't recover it. And we couldn't get an assurance from government very quickly that actually if there was fraud or error and we'd done all that was reasonable, that we wouldn't still pick up the bill. And you know, a 25k loss is almost a street full of bandees in terms of council tax. So yeah, we took a bit of a knock for being a little cautious, but actually we were doing good governance. And also there's a volume thing. So we've already given out almost twice as much as any of the other districts and boroughs. So we don't have twice as many staff. We're not that huge in terms of resourcing through Revs and Ben service. So on a pure percentage, we were a few percent behind others. But actually, if you were totting up the millions, we were ahead pretty quickly in terms of actually cash in people's bank accounts. So again, even with the second scheme, we're trying to push out 1.7 million. We're already halfway there, but that's probably more than most of the other districts and boroughs. So depends on whether you go by a percentage on volumetrics. In terms of risk, we've just received some fraud updates on what post and pre-verification should look like. So having received the government guidance last week on what a pre-verification exercise might look like is a bit late, one might say, 12 weeks after you've given away 32 million. But we're quite reassured that most of what they suggest, well, we've probably done an enhanced service, so we don't think we've done anything fraudulent or in error. Certainly we've picked up a lot along the way, and therefore there should be less inconvenience and cost on the post verification. So all in all, we believe it may not have been as fast, but 12 weeks to dispatch 37 million isn't a bad exercise. And certainly from the personal conversations I've had with a number of businesses, they've actually understood what a challenge it really is. They're obviously want the grant and are glad that we're supporting them, but also they're grateful for the business rate discount as well. And hopefully when we do the post checks, we'll demonstrate that we had a very, very secure system. Is that okay?
Thank you, Stuart. Anything else on that, Councillor Marriott?
No, it's quite comprehensive and sort of for that. Thanks, Stuart, because I'm obviously concerned about any fraud and risk, you know, and obviously it comes back to us as an authority to pick up the tab, as you say. So initially criticism, but then again the cautiousness is actually probably saved a lot of that. Thanks.
Stuart, can I just ask on that one? I know we used BDO as our internal auditors to help with the system design, for want of a better expression. Was that what most councils did, or were we in a minority that took that sort of extra push on governance at the outset view, if I can describe it as that?
I think everybody's slightly different. So we also use Revs and Bens, which is part of the LGSS wider partnership. So it's ourselves, Milton Keynes and Horsham. And so they were doing some elements of the administration, and certainly the LGSS IT built part of the portal. And we used two elements of BDO. One was as the internal auditors to advise on our processes, our checks and balance and methodology, but we then actually used BDO in their consultancy side, for want of a better phrase, using auditors to actually review every single claim at speed. So there is a very large monster master file which demonstrates all the checks and balances against Company House, who the registered directors are, is it the right bank account to the right address, etc., etc. And where we had any anomalies, we've reached out to the organisations to clarify, and they've provided additional information. So we've used BDO in two ways. One is the internal auditor to agree the process. Joe and the risk team also were part of that exercise to just make sure we had as many eyes looking at it. LGSS internal audit also checked through some of the processes, but they were then used on the Milton Keynes side. So we've done as much governance as we can, and in the initial weeks we were then revising some of the portal bits to see, were we too tight on some of the governance? Could we accept a slightly more risk by using some of the government tools like Spotlight, which we did do, but it flagged up so many errors. We've used it as an aside because it just tells you things like there are directors, or it flags up that one director is a risk, whereas that's not necessarily so. So we were content that our governance process was more informative, for want of a better phrase.
Okay.
But we use BDO in two different ways and two different teams.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, for that. That was off the back of Joe's earlier, the current governance report. Any other questions on Joe's report? No. Okay, that's. I think that concludes us for this evening. Then, thank you for your time. I thought it was a good debate. Some really good points made. As we said earlier, we're looking to come back together again on the 27th of July with a whole variety of different reports. So I think Stuart's got a bit of work to do between now and then, by the sounds of it, and Joe, I should add. So thank you for that. So I'll formally close the meeting now.